A few weeks back, I made a video on the M16a1, and from the comments, it was clear that everyone agreed that the M16a1 is awesome. The M16a2, however, people are a little bit more divided. So in this video, I would like to talk about 4 steps that the M16a2 took forward, and 3 steps that the M16a2 took back. So let's talk about the steps forward first, starting all the way at the front. And this is one small step for the M16a2, kind of like that one small step that man supposedly took on the moon. But anyway, it is the Flashhider. The M16a2 has the, surpriser, A2 Flashhider. So the M16a1 Flashhider had holes that went all the way around. The M16a2 Flashhider just had holes in the top and was missing the holes on the bottom. The Flashhider's job is to hide your signature. And it doesn't matter if it hides your signature of the muzzle flash, if you're also shooting dirt and sand and dust everywhere every time you pull the trigger for everyone around you to see. So the M16a2 has those holes on the bottom filled in so that it doesn't kick stuff at the ground, kicking dust up everywhere for everyone to see. The second big thing, moving back just a little bit more, is the handguard. The triangle type handguard is really cool, it's really comfortable, and I really like it. However, the big problem that the triangle handguard has is that it is fragile. It has teeth on the top and on the bottom, and those teeth on the top and on the bottom are really easily broken, and the M16a1 handguards use a softer plastic that's easier to break. So those handguards, frequently you'll find them with cracks and dings and just not in good shape. The M16a2 handguards, however, are much sturdier. Part of that is due to just improvements in plastics from the early 70s to the late 80s. However, the other thing is due to their construction and their shape. The A2 handguards are round and they're a little thicker, but also, really importantly, they are the same piece, both the top and the bottom. So the M16a1 handguards, if your left half breaks, you need to find a left half to replace it. However, on the M16a2, if your top half breaks, you can replace it with anything because they're the exact same molded part. They're just, put on the top or put on the bottom. Now, the third big step that the M16a2 took forward was the brass deflector. This is especially important for left-handed shooters. This slick side right here is brass deflectorless. It is a lot more likely that those rounds are going to open up and come towards a left-handed shooter's face. The M16a2 fixed this problem. They added just a little nub sticking out right here called the brass deflector, and when the rounds leave the chamber, they hit that brass deflector, and then they fly forward. As an added little bonus, when you shoot a bunch, your brass deflector is going to be marked up with brass. 1, it looks cool, and 2, it shows everybody around you that you actually shoot, you don't just own the gun. The final thing that I would really like to talk about is the most controversial. So, some of you might hear this and absolutely hate me, but I think that one of the biggest steps forward from the A1 to the A2 is the sights. I know a lot of people don't like A2 sights. I know Eugene Stoner himself did not like A2 sights. I would like to talk about 3 main things. The first, I think the least important, is just the adjustment knob for adjusting for windage. On the A2, you need to have a bullet tip, and it's just a lot more work to get that thing moving. However, on the A2, you can adjust it just with clicks, just with your fingers. Number 2, I think that the elevation adjustments are really important. When the M16a1 was made, it was made with the idea that it is very, very rare that soldiers will engage past 300 meters. And I think that that is a pretty good expectation to have. I wouldn't feel undergunned if I had an M16a1 because the likelihood of me, especially as a civilian, needing to shoot at something past 300 meters is very, 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 very low. However, one reason why I think the A2 is better for people in our world today, for civilians in our world today, is that most of us only have available ranges that go out to 100 yards. So if I'm only ever going to be able to shoot at 100 yards, and that is all I can ever do, if I am in a situation where I need to shoot out to those longer ranges, well, with an M16a1, I would just be guessing. I wouldn't have any hope of figuring out what I'm doing. However, with an M16a2, if I'm gonna try and shoot out to 500 yards for some really awful situation that I'm in, I move it to the 5, and sure, I might not be right on, but at least I'll have a guess. The other big thing about the sights that I think is really good is just the sight picture you get, especially since you can switch between the two apertures, from the smaller aperture to the larger aperture. If you've ever used A1 sights, you know that they can be a little bit rough to look through, especially if you're trying to shoot at closer targets. If you're trying to do some drills where you're shooting at closer targets, A1 sights can be kind of hard. But with the A2 sights, you flip to that really big aperture, and you have plenty to see. You can basically aim through the sights and use it like a red dot, and you'll be hitting the target. Sure, it's not as precise as the fine aperture. That's what the fine aperture on both of these is for, but the larger aperture is really nice for shooting at especially closer targets. On the A1, the front sight is tapered, and on the A2, it is just flat at the top. Some people, especially when they're shooting at longer ranges, prefer that flat at the top front sight because they can use that to some degree for windage adjustment for wind. So what about the 3 steps back of the A2? Well, the first one that a lot of people are quick to mention is the barrel profile. The A1 has a pencil profile barrel that's really thin, and it gives you a very lightweight rifle and a very handy rifle. If you've ever maneuvered an M16a1, it feels really good just because it's so light, especially towards the front. On the M16a2, they ruined that. On the M16a2, they gave it a thicker profile, especially towards the end, especially past the gas block. They kept it as a thin profile under the handguards, and then past the gas block, they gave it a thicker profile. This adds about a pound of weight to the rifle, and it's all the way at the end, making it a little bit less wieldy, making it a little bit less comfortable to shoot. I really don't like that change. I've heard a few different reasons for why they did it. One of the reasons I've heard is that they were finding out that the barrels were bending at the gas block, so to stop them from bending, they made them a little bit thicker. And then after actually cleaning those rifles, they learned that they weren't bending, it was just carbon buildup inside of the barrel. I've also heard that they thickened it up past the gas block because they were finding that after sustained fire, they were having a shift in impact, and that the thicker profile barrel fixed that shift. I have seen conflicting information on both of the sides of that, and I haven't been able to do enough testing. However, right here I do have a later barrel of an M16A1, an FN1 from the 80s, so I would be able to test that and see if it fixed the problems. That'll be a video for another day, and if you'd like to see that, leave a comment down below. See if I have a shift in impact after sustained fire. So, while this barrel would probably do better under sustained fire, it also has the con of being a little bit less wieldy. The second thing that I think is a big step back for the A2 is the stock. They made the stock on the A2 just a little bit longer. In my experience, the A2 stock is less comfortable than the A1, and the A1 stock is perfect length for most people. I've had people shoot other rifles of mine that had A1 setups. They really did perfectly fine with that butt stock length. The A2 I think is just too long. And the longer butt stock combined with the heavier barrel just makes A2s feel less controllable, less wieldy, less comfortable than A1s. However, the third big downside of the M16A2 versus the M16A1 is the burst. So on the M16A1, it was safe, semi-automatic, and then fully automatic. On the A2, they changed it to safe, semi-automatic, and burst. However, the way that the burst was implemented on the M16A2 was just not very good. Let's say I am in semi-automatic, so I shoot boom, 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 boom. I don't know how many shots I fired, but let's say I fired 11. Then I switch it to burst, I pull the trigger, I'm only going to get one more shot because I fired 11 and I am on the 12th. I've done already shot number 10, shot number 11, and when I pull the trigger, it will just shoot shot number 12. Then after that, of course, it's going to fire 3 shots when I pull the trigger. Again, for marksmanship, this bothers a lot of people because the M16A2 has a slightly different trigger pull for each of those 3 settings. So because you're getting a slightly different trigger pull, it's harder to be precise and accurate with it. The M16A2 does have some big advantages to the A1. The A2 Flashhider is an improvement. The A2 Handguard is better, even though I personally find it a little bit less comfortable, and in my opinion, the sights are a much better battle sight. However, it also has its drawbacks. The barrel profile is thicker and not as wieldy. The stock is less comfortable because it's longer, and the burst fire is stupid. But what do you think? Do you think I'm the biggest idiot in the world? I think someone left that comment on the A1 video. Or do you think that I actually make some pretty good points? In any case, I'm 8mm Mauser Man, and I really like M16s. But I lived on.
You be the judge. That was way more explosion than I expected. Keep the change, you filthy animal.